Okay, Risha, the recording is started, so go ahead and take it away when you're ready.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CA Testing Tools User Community Webcast. Before we begin with our presentation today, I would just like to introduce a couple of folks from our Intertest team. I have here with me Scott Davidson, our architect, who's going to present COBOL V5 migration today. Hello, Scott.
Hi, guys.
And myself, Richa Navani. I'm the senior engineer on the Intertest team. And I'm not sure if we have a product owner here. Art, are you on the call?
I think Art's on the call, but he's not on the audio.
Oh, okay. Okay, never mind. So I'm just going to pass it to Scott to begin our presentation today.
All right, great. Thanks, Richard. Just one thing before we move on from that slide. There's a real quick minor update. We have a new product manager, Dana Bordeaux. Dana Bordeaux joins us with a ton of experience. So we're excited to have him on, and we're looking forward to working with him. So okay, why don't we move forward? Okay, so here's what I wanted to talk about today. Just wanted to go through what's new with COBOL version 5, why migrating can be hard. I'll go over what I would consider the three biggest hurdles that we'll go over that most clients will hit, and then some suggestions and best practices on getting over those hurdles and some other things to think about. But one thing to keep in mind here is that this is not meant to be all inclusive here. This is really just meant to be a highlight, a set of highlights of the things that most of you are most likely to run into. So like I said, the first thing I'm going to go into is what's new with COBOL version 5. This is not meant to be an all-inclusive list of things that are new with version 5. This is more just focusing on problems that you may run into while doing the migration. So, okay, getting into it, the internal improvements, and I'll use that word loosely, kind of improvements. Some of you may see them as negatives. It takes a lot more memory to compile. IBM will recommend that you have at least 200 meg available of memory, so that may require a sysprog to increase some of the limits. It typically takes more time to compile programs with this new version of the compiler. Not a lot more time, but if you're using optimization, it can take more time. If you're using a high-level optimization and you have a very large program, we've seen a very large increase, even as high as like 15-fold. So there can be some considerations there. So just keep that in mind, that if things don't seem to be moving very long, that may actually be may not actually indicate a problem. There's a bunch of additional work data sets that are required during compile. SysU 1 through 15 now. It used to be 1 through 7, now it's 1 through 15, and SysMDEC are all required as DDs during the compile step. There's a bunch of new compiler options. I won't go through all of them. I'll just try to hit the ones that will affect you. You can now specify the architecture level for the compiler to generate instructions for. That's obviously massive. I mean, past COBOL releases, you really couldn't take advantage of the hardware that the COBOL program is going to run on, and now they've added support so you can target what architecture level your COBOL program will be running on. IBM has even offered day one support for the newest version, for Z13. So they've taken some huge leaps forward there. Just keep in mind you want to choose the lowest level of hardware that the program will run on. Otherwise, you're going to get an OC1 admin. And just when you do choose what level you want, keep in mind your disaster recovery hardware. A lot of clients have the disaster hardware recovery, their hardware for their disaster recovery, not necessarily the same level, so you want to make sure you know what hardware you're going to be running on for your disaster recovery. The ARCS levels right now are 6 through 11. Actually, 6 is only available with the first version of COBOL 5, COBOL 5.1. That was for a Z990. That's not a valid option anymore with 5.2. So thinking about 5.2, Arch 7 through 11 are the valid options. 7 is a Z9, 8 is a Z10, Arch 11 is a Z196, 10 is an EC12, and then 11 is the newest one, the for the Z13 that will generate instructions with all of the new instructions that IBM has to offer. I mentioned early optimization that the op level you can set to 0, 1, and 2. The higher the number, the higher the optimization, and the higher the number, the longer it takes to compile the program, as I mentioned earlier. And the higher the number, the lower the ability that you're giving your debugger to actually work with your COBOL program. We've seen examples where just a real simple example where you may have say 3 move statements, and the optimization level, if you had it high enough, it could merge those all into one statement. That may confuse your debugger because you won't be able to stop at the middle verb. You'll only be able to stop at either the first or the last verb depending on where the instructions land. I've even seen cases where you'd have 2 verbs and the instructions that were needed to lead up to those verbs were done together for optimization purposes. So when you stop at the first verb, some of the data was updated for the second verb already. So these little things, just some things to keep in mind when you're using optimization. The IBM compiler is very good at optimizing now, and you should definitely think about taking advantage of that. But it will confuse your debugger if you go to the high level. STGOpt is a new option. It removes the unreferenced data items in your data division. That's actually not a new feature, just a new option. It used to be a sub-option of the opt option, opt storage, and they pulled it out into its own option. HGPR is a new option. It preserves the high halves across calls. So that's a best practice to use that option. If your applications call programs that are not written in COBOL or C or PL1 or some other LE-enabled language that will preserve the calls for you, you'll need to make sure that you use HGPR for those. There's a new rules option you should look into for helping identifying poor coding practices. We've found a lot of our clients have found the rules option very helpful. And there's a whole bunch of others too. For instance, the size option is no longer available. I didn't mention this earlier, but the compiler now uses language environment at compile time now. So it will use the LE heap as needed. There are some OMBS requirements. The ACID that's used to compile the programs needs to have an OMBS segment. That's actually new with version 5.2, so if you're using 5.1, that may be new to you. The compiler now produces program objects. So you must use the binder, and you must bind into a PDSE. And I'll get into that a little more later as one of the roadblocks. And just as a point of note, the compiler itself lives in the PDSE. Internally, IBM has restructured how the COBOL program is structured itself. If you're familiar with PL1 or C, the listing and the internal tables might look very familiar to you. The PGC and the TGC, they're gone. They're replaced with a static map. Internally, the compiler is well, it's kind of split into 2 parts. There's a front end, which digests the source code and creates an internal representation of your program. And then there's a back end that actually takes that internal code and generates assembler instructions. And the reason why IBM did this is because the back end, the part that generates the instructions, that's shared between all the LE-enabled languages now, C and PL1, et cetera. All of those will generate their own, they share the back end. So that means that all those programs can share optimization techniques, architecture support, and things along those lines. So it's again another big leap forward for IBM on that one. There's a ton of other minor improvements as well. There's some syntax changes you can take advantage of, such as inline comments and the removal of millennial language extensions, MLE. I only really mentioned the inline comments one because I'm going to have some coding examples later on, and I'm actually going to use some inline comments. So if you're not familiar with that, I'll point that out later. There's a whole bunch of other improvements as well. Some of the ones that stood out to me were the working storage limits. Working storage can now be bumped to 2 gig. You can have 2 gig of working storage. And an individual data item can be as large, can be just obscenely large. It can be a billion bytes. That's nine nines. 999,999,999. Very, very large data items. The other big improvement that we saw a lot of our clients taking advantage of was the tables can now be unbounded as well. So you can say occurs 1 to unbounded depending on some item. And that's limited to linkage sections, so you can actually have higher level languages calling COBOL programs that have unbounded tables so they can manage those constructs. So that's mostly what I want to talk about with what's new with COBOL 5. So now we're going to move into why migrating can be so hard. So there's really 3 significant roadblocks that we've seen clients run into. The first I'll talk about is unsupported compiler releases. So there's a lot of OSVS COBOL out there in the field, and if you're going to use COBOL 5, you cannot mix COBOL 5 and OSVS COBOL. That's no longer supported. The same is true with COBOL 2 programs that compile the no-res option. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, the no-res option, the no-res actually pulls in the runtime modules that are required for that program into the load module itself, so it doesn't actually use the runtime. So that's why that one's very similar to OSVS COBOL, so it doesn't support that. CSCS dropped support for OSVS COBOL a while ago, so I'm sure a bunch of you have already gone through at least part of this migration. It hasn't supported it since CICS 3.1, and that was dropped at the end of last year, so there's been a bunch of CSCS releases that haven't supported it, so hopefully at least some of you out there have already gone through this migration or at least in part, if not fully. I mentioned A-Mode 24 on here. That's just for completeness. They've actually, IBM's actually added support for A-Mode 24 with maintenance. So that's not really a problem anymore. I just really mentioned that for completeness. The second roadblock to talk about is the migration to PDSEs. As I mentioned, the compiler lives in a PDSE, but more importantly, the compiler generates program objects that must be bound into a PDSE. So if your compiler now compiles into a PDS, that's no longer going to work. And later on I'll go through some techniques as to what you're going to want to look out for your PDSE migration. And the third one is absolutely the biggest one: testing. IBM will certify that all correct programs will behave the same when we compile with this compiler. The problem is that not all incorrect programs, I'm using kind of air quotes there, not all incorrect programs are diagnosed easily as incorrect. So the behavior can and will change when you use this new compiler for those programs that you may not even realize are incorrect. This wasn't really a conscious effort on IBM's part. This wasn't like them saying that there's a bunch of loopholes that they want to plug in here. This is really more a byproduct of the compiler generating newer code and more efficient instructions. In the past, as I mentioned, older versions of COBOL didn't take advantage of the new architecture, so it was more or less just generating the same sets of instructions. So it didn't really take advantage of any new techniques. So when they started taking advantage of that, they realized that there were a lot of bad programs out there, and they got affected by these changes. And I have more examples of that later, so we'll see that in a little bit. Okay, suggestions and best practices. So before you start your migration, the biggest thing you're going to want to do is get up to speed on maintenance. You get up to speed on your, install the latest and greatest COBOL compiler, get up to speed on LE, the binder, any subsystems that may use, that you may be running on COBOL under, like CSCS or DB2. Upgrade your testing tools to the latest and greatest versions of maintenance, whether it's IBM, CA, or any other vendor's tools. They're going to have maintenance that you're going to be required to apply in order to support the latest versions of the compiler. So make sure you're up to date on maintenance on those. Software Change Manager, hopefully you're using Endeavor, but regardless of what you're using, you're going to want to make sure that it is also, it easily can be affected by the COBOL changes as well. So you should make sure you're up to date there. And really, any executables that can be used that can be COBOL aware are going to need to be at least looked at, if not upgraded. I'll mention here that when I put this presentation together, 5.2 is the latest compiler. Last week, IBM announced 6.1. 6.1 will be out in March, the middle of March, I believe is the 18th. They just announced it last week. It's a brand new compiler. So already this slide's a little bit out of date. So maybe if you haven't started, maybe you should think about 6.1. But obviously that's totally up to you. And just as a reminder, I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth driving home. This really is meant as more of a highlights, right? So this is not meant as an all-inclusive thing. So you're going to want to review review the latest migration and tuning guides for more information that may be applicable to your shops that I'm not covering here. Come on. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, there are changes to the JCL for the compiler. Specifically, there's some more DDs that are required. There's more memory that's required. Typically, there's more time that's required to actually do the compiles. So start updating your SCM tool now. Hopefully that's the endeavor. You can go into your processors and start making those changes. A lot of them should be generic enough that you don't have to worry about affecting your older compilers, but you should start thinking about those changes now. You're also going to want to start thinking about what compile options you want to make for each stage, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I wanted to mention it now while I was talking about SCM. You're going to want to get started on your PDSE conversion. PDSEs have been around for a long time. IBM, when it first brought it out, there were some problems early on, and it may have put a bad taste in some people's mouths. But they've made a lot of strides in this area, and it's very obvious that IBM is heading in this area. So now is definitely the time to make this change if you haven't fully made it already. PDSs obviously have a lot of restrictions on them. There's the need to compress them. There's the accidental possibility of overwriting the directory. You might need to take them offline from time to time to increase the directory or increase the extents. IBM will just tell you to do it blunt, brute force. Just create a PDSE and call it the PDS name.pdse. Copy everything into that PDSE from the PDS using IBCopy. IBCopy will fully support copying into a PDSE, so that shouldn't be a problem there. Rename your old PDS to something to just add a .backup at the end, and then rename this new PDSE to the old name. So now you've got no JCL changes, and you can just start using your PDSE. There are a few drawbacks to this, of course. Like I mentioned, the compiler will use program objects, so you must use a PDSE. So if you feel for some reason you must fall back to use a PDS, well, you're not going to have your COBOL version 5 executables anymore. But probably the biggest drawback to using PDSEs is that they can't be shared across a sysplex boundary. And you can go out and you can talk to IBM and you can find a few different ways of getting around this problem. IBM will recommend that their strongest recommendation is to just use one sysplex as sort of the owner of a PDS, and then use some transfer protocol like FTP or XMIT to update your remote PDSs and the other sysplexes. Again, I'm not an expert on that. This is more informational than anything else. But that's what IBM will recommend, is that you have, if you do share data across a sysplex boundary, that there are methods for making that work. The other big roadblock that I'll talk about is locating non-compliant programs. Like I mentioned, OSVS COBOL programs can't be mixed with COBOL version 5 programs. But with maintenance that IBM has provided, anytime you execute an OSVS COBOL program, a warning message can be issued. And that will be that first message there, that IGZ 0268 warning message. And in addition, if it's called by an LE-enabled program, that IGZ 0269 message will tell you what program is actually making that call. So hopefully with that, you can start making an inventory as to what programs you may want to look at to figure out what the migration is going to be. In addition, there are some utilities available that will identify programs that are written in OSVS COBOL that may not be run all that frequently. They may only be written, once a year for certain things, or only under certain obscure circumstances. SimDump Batch is a utility that I'll mention here called COUMRS, our management reporting system. I've got an example of the output here. Hopefully you can see it on the screen. It's a little tight, but I try to massage as best I could to try and put the data out there. This is an example of the MRS utility itself. It performs a load library analysis on any given load library. By default, it'll report on all the CSECs within the load module. And I just created a real simple example here. I just created a new load module, a new load library, and I populated it with a few executables. Of interest here is the fact that there are 3 load modules that contain CSECs that were compiled with a version of the compiler that's not supported, and I've highlighted those in red. You can see that 2.4, that's the OSVS, that's the 5741-CB1. That's the COBOL identifier that IBM uses for that compiler, and 2.4 is the release number. That's the version that you're going to want to try and find with the MRS report. Like I mentioned earlier, you can use this utility to find those rarely used programs, the ones that won't be found by the LE runtime unless they are executed. But just to be clear here, that IBM is not dropping support for the execution of OSVS COBOL programs. You just can't mix them with COBOL 5. So IBM would probably recommend, and I would as well, that if you find these programs and you think they're executed, you should probably try and find a way to get those compiled with a new compiler. But as long as they're not mixing with COBOL version 5, you don't have an immediate need to do that as part of your COBOL version 5 upgrade. All right, so I'll get into a few of the testing cases here. Excuse me. Like I mentioned, testing is going to be probably your biggest effort. I've coded a few really simple coding examples. In this one, we have a PIC9 field that's redefined. That is a redefine of a PIC-X field that has data in it that doesn't conform to the picture clause of the redefining item. I've highlighted here that the third byte has a space in it. I've put that in red, hopefully to try to so you can actually see what the problem is here. For older versions of COBOL, doing a comparison on usage 1-RD would not cause an add-in, and it would produce consistent results, albeit they could be incorrect results, but they would be consistent. So if they were correct in your environment, you wouldn't know that this was a problem. But again, COBOL version 5 assumes that all the zone bits are going to be correct. So when compiling with version 5, again, it's unlikely that the program would add in when you do some comparison for that usage 1 RD field. But because different assembly instructions are being generated, the results could be different when the zone bits are not valid. And I would recommend, at least for cases like this, that you'd look to the migration guide for information on setting your numproc and your zone data options. Okay, so I've seen a bunch of examples of using poor ODO values and getting results that you had expected, but not necessarily what the compiler would expect you to see. I've seen a bunch of different variations on this, so I've tried to sum it up into one simple coding case. In this case, I have a table that occurs 0 to 1 times, depending on TBL size. Looking at the procedure code, it's certainly legal for that first move to move a large number to TBL size. It fits the definitions. There's no problem there. However, when I execute the second move, I'd get different results. With the releases early to version 5, I would get 100 X's moved to working storage at the first instance of my field. But in version 5, you would just get the 1X would be moved to my field, followed by 99 bytes of, well, something else, like garbage, I guess you'd say, whatever followed the literal itself. The best way to detect a problem like this is to use SSRange. SSRange will find all references to subscripts and indices that are outside of the defined range. So SSRange should really be your friend here. You should rely on using that, especially in your test environment. Okay, overpopulated data items. Some data items can contain data that have more digits than the picture clause will allow. So from the above example, X is defined as 2 bytes. Y is defined as 2 digits, but the data that was moved into X is 3 digits long, an unsigned 1, 2, 3 in that first move statement. Again, the compiler will generate very different instructions for these moves, so it's possible that the behavior would be consistent with older versions of the compiler, but it's not likely. For problems like this, I would recommend that you refer to the new rules option. There's a sub option of the rules option called no even pack that would catch this specific item, and I'd recommend that you look up that option and figure out what's best for your case. All right, so moving on to finding more statements. Obviously, testing is going to be your biggest thing here. So you've seen that finding differences in how COBOL programs behave, finding those things can be a little convoluted, but those cases are probably going to be pretty hidden themselves. So extensive testing is really going to be required to find them. I'd recommend using more of the compiler's debugging features like SSRange and the rules options, like I mentioned earlier, especially earlier in your testing stages. Use them to your fullest advantage. I would recommend, at least because of the debuggers, that you would start out with without using optimization, or I guess better put would be to use opt0. In my head, it's still no opt, but opt0 is what we're calling it now. And as an aside, IBM will. I believe they started calling it opt0. This is just speculation on my point, but I believe they called it opt0 because they don't actually stop doing optimization. If they find cases where they can do very minor, very safe optimization, they will do those things even with your optimization level set to 0. However, I would change that optimization level to the level you plan on using in your in your production environment while you're still in test. We've seen some behavior differences between optimization levels due to invalid data as well. Just to give you an example, if you had a data item that had some invalid data in it, but then you made that data valid by moving it to a packed field, and then that field was then used in a compare, if your optimization level was set high, the compiler will believe that those two variables are identical. So it may actually make the reference against the first variable, which actually has bad data in it, and it would produce the results that you didn't expect. And again, that would be very confusing, especially if you're using a debugger, considering you're comparing it against something that has valid data in it. They could be equal, but the compiler will actually compare it against the first item, and they actually won't be equal. Yeah, and then as you move closer to production, you want to make sure you set the options that you want to use. You want to try and get rid of your debugging options, get rid of your optimization levels. You want to set your optimization levels to what you think you're going to use in production. And then there's a bunch of other options like storage options, like STG app that you're going to want to think about for going to production. Okay, one additional note I wanted to close with. This probably isn't all that important for most of you, but if you find yourself in a situation where you need to look at a dump and you don't have any testing tools available, internally, COBOL no longer uses base locators to address data items. So there's a new method of finding where your data items should live, that they will live, should you need to find them without using a tool like CA-SIMDump or InterTest or one of the InterTest products. In this case, I'm using CMRCOBB which is our demo program for an intertest batch. Looking at the COBOL listing, here's a little snippet from working storage. I've massaged this to make it a little more readable on the screen. The data items and the actual definitions will be kind of far apart, so I took out some of the white space in between. But look at the COBOL listing here. To find where task num is located in storage, you used to have to find the base locator and then pick up the offset off of that, off to the right in the listing, and then using the map option. In this new method, you need to find the 01 level item that task num is defined to. In this case, that's task structure. And also notice that off to the right of task num, the offset off of task structure is 8. You navigate down to a new area in the listing called a static map. Find the 01 item that you're interested in, and again, I've massaged this item to make it a little more readable. The beginning is as it would look in the listing, and then I took out a bunch of variables, just to make it fit on the screen a little easier. And as you can see, task structure in this case starts at offset 308. So you would add 308 to 8, which is the offset of task num, to get the location of that in working storage. Obviously, this is much easier if you have some testing tools like SimDump Batch and SimDump and Intertest, or any of the IBM tools or competitors' tools. But from time to time, I'm sure you'll find that you need to actually dig into a dump and really just use the listing yourself. And if that's the case, I just want you to be aware that there are some differences. All right, so that's the end of the presentation that I had. I'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. There is one question in the Q&A box. It's, what is the utility you use to find old COBOL modules?
Oh, I'm sorry, maybe I went over that quick. The utility that I used in the presentation, and that's available to our SimDump Batch clients, was CAOU-MRS. That's the utility that will, you point it at a load library, and it will report on all the load libraries, all the load modules, and the CSEX in those load modules in that library. It will identify the compiler that was used. It'll tell you the date and time it was used. It'll tell you some of the options possibly. And just as a side note, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but there are exits that you can write to that utility where you can get control for each CSEX, and we give you a pointer to the beginning of the signature area. So you could actually go into the COBOL program itself and report on options if you wanted to find out what options were used when that program was compiled. Let's see, are there any issues with footprints when copying PDS to PDSEs? That's a good question for the CA Endeavor folks. I can tell you that we use CA Endeavor here internally. I've done that copy myself. I did not run into any problems. So hopefully that answers your question. Are there any issues? I wouldn't feel confident with just saying there's absolutely no issues, but I can tell you that when I tried it, it worked fine. And honestly, just knowing what IAB copy is doing internally and how the load module and CSEX are structured, I wouldn't expect there to be any problems. Let's see. Is it correct to assume CA Optimizer will continue to work with COBOL 5? So I'm assuming you're asking about CA Optimizer's runtime. CA Optimizer, the product itself, the runtime, the compile time piece was stabilized because it only works with OSVS COBOL, and the runtime is no longer supported, and we provide you with the Optimizer 2 runtime. And yes, the Optimizer 2 runtime with maintenance does support the execution of COBOL version 5 programs. Let's see, how much larger have COBOL 5 loads increased? IBM has made a conscious decision to trade space for speed. They will generate a lot more instructions if they feel that they can get the program to run faster. So you will see it get bigger. Almost unconditionally, you will see it get bigger. I haven't really seen it get obscenely bigger, and I haven't really seen it get so big that it would necessarily cause a problem. I do know I'm on the design council for COBOL, so I do hear some other people speaking, and I do know that there were a few instances where they had very large programs that got much larger, and that there were some problems with some extremely large programs getting very, very large. But I personally haven't seen that, and I would consider that to be more of a minor case, not really all that big. Let's see.
Scott, this is Phil Junio. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Scott, just one quick note on the copying or converting from a PDS to PDSE with the footprints that you were talking about.
Right.
So there is a utility in Endeavor. It's called BST Xcopy, and that's a special utility that could be used to convert from PDSs to PDSEs, and it retains the load module footprint.
Okay, good.
So it's a really good utility. Yeah, we used it very heavily here, and it works great. All the footprints all come over, and if you do it a different way and you don't use that utility, the BST Xcopy, if you don't use that, then the risk is that you might be dropping some of the footprints when you get over to the PDSE library.
Okay, so I assume that the footprints you would use will be the load module footprints then, the CSEC footprints would be
correct,
okay.
Correct. The load module footprint, that's the one that would disappear if you just do a plain old IEB copy. So the BST Xcopy definitely is the way to go with that.
Excellent. Thanks for the information.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see. Looking for new questions. Has IBM announced end of life for Enterprise COBOL 422? I have not seen that yet. I would expect to see it soon, though, to be honest with you, considering that they now have 6.1, 5.2, and 5.1. They typically wouldn't have more than 4 versions of the COBOL compiler active at once. They'd like to, I believe, like to keep it at 3, but I haven't seen that yet. If I do, maybe you can send an email to the community, and when it does come out, I can try to find that for you and answer it through the community. The benefit to that, obviously, is that once it's answered, everyone can see it. Can you mix runtime COBOL code in 2 separate libraries, i.e. PDSE first and PDS second in a CIX region? I believe you can. I haven't actually tried that myself. When I did it, albeit my cases were always on the smaller side, I didn't really have considerations where I would want to keep a PDS around. I have concatenated PDSEs and PDSs in my DFH RPL. There are, like for instance, when I was using SimNump and Intertest, I have those modules, those executables lived in a PDS. In my case, they can live in a PDSE, but they lived in a PDS in my case, and I was able to mix those 2, so I don't see any problems with it. Will this presentation be available after this presentation? If so, how can it be attained? So yeah, just like any other presentation, this will be posted to the community's website. Len, I thought I saw an email about YouTube as well. Is that true?
Yes, yeah. What we do is we post the replays out to YouTube, and then we embed the YouTube video in the community, so it's easier to watch.
That's great. I didn't even realize. That's good news. So Len, thank you for answering it, typing in the answer as well. What about PDSE version 2? Yeah, I didn't even really touch on PDSE version 2. I was really just using the initial versions. I would recommend you go back to IBM to find out what those differences are and how they may affect your environment and what differences there are. I honestly am not all that familiar with PDS version 2, so I really wouldn't be able to say. So I'm just going to put off the white flag there and say, okay, I think you should just call IBM on that one. Okay, so IBM says that they have put a lot of effort into making COBOL version 5 programs very high performing. We have sometimes experienced the opposite. What's your experience? So yeah, I've definitely seen. So you're right. IBM has said a lot that they feel that that their efforts to making programs perform a lot better are great, and they have very hard, concrete examples that you can try yourself where those programs will be a lot faster. Obviously, that can't be true for all programs. I've definitely seen cases where I've had programs that I thought would fit the bill and would get big improvements, and they only got small improvements. I've seen the case where regular programs just basically run almost the same. I haven't seen any degradation, or at least anything significant degradation. You know, some of the quicker programs is very hard to tell. They run very fast anyway, so that comparing them probably isn't even relevant. But I haven't really seen anything where it used to take X amount of time and now it takes a lot longer. I haven't seen that myself. And to be honest, I've only heard of that on the DPP calls, and only for very obscure circumstances and almost unconditionally. And I only say almost because I can't think of any scenarios, but almost unconditionally, IBM has taken that program and found those problems and fixed them. That they were not necessarily design flaws, that they were actually things that they just were doing poorly that was causing the optimization hit. So that they were fixed by recompiling the program with maintenance. Okay, one more question. It looks, is it best to start back converting from PDSEs from production back to development? Yeah, you know what? I would say that each shop is very, very different. I wouldn't necessarily make a recommendation one way or the other. Internally here at CA, most of our COBOL code, not all of it, but most of our COBOL code is really set up for regression testing for our tools, not just our testing tools, but many other products as well. We do have some COBOL development, and so I'm not really speaking for those, but the majority of the stuff, and certainly the things that I was dealing with, I did it from more the development to production side, but I can definitely see benefits of doing it the other way. Is the 4 gig 4.2 limit lifted for load module size under version 5? I'm not sure I know what 4 gig limit you're talking about, Steve. Maybe you can, which limit? The size of the load module can only be 4 gig. I actually thought it was smaller than that. I actually thought it was only 2 gig, and it wasn't necessarily a compiler limit as it was a PDS limit, or a limit of the size of the tech stack. And if that's true, then by default it would have been lifted with this version, because PDSEs can support much larger load modules and program objects. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't really see any other questions in the chat yet. I'll give it another few seconds.
Yeah, no, I don't see. Yeah, I don't see any other ones.
Okay. So great, then, Len, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, everybody, if you have a few moments, I did just post a poll so you can give us some feedback on today's session. But other than that, I think we're ready to wrap up. So thank you very much, Scott. It was a great presentation. We got a lot of good feedback already. And we'll talk to you next time, everybody.
Great. All right. Thanks, Len. And just one closing note: if you do have other questions you want to ask, you can please just reach out to me. Your probably best bet is to just do it through the community. Just post the questions to the community, and I'll do my best to get it answered if I don't answer it myself. But I know we've only got an hour, and then this is we're probably getting close to the end. So you know, please, if you've got questions, post them out there. We'll be more than happy to answer them.
Great. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, guys.